He found himself standing at the threshold of a forgotten parish church in a quiet, moss-covered corner of Europe. The air inside was cold, thick with the silence of centuries. It was not the silence of peace, but of things left unsaid, of truths buried beneath layers of devotion and time. The light filtering through the dust motes revealed a simple, unassuming interior. The nave was narrow, the pews were worn, and the stone walls bore the weight of countless prayers. Most visitors, he knew, would pass through, perhaps admiring the faded frescoes or the simple wooden crucifix, and leave with a sense of quiet reverence. But he was not looking for reverence. He was looking for a language spoken in stone and shadow, a language that had been deliberately silenced. His gaze fell upon a carved rosette near the baptismal font. It was small, no larger than his hand, and intricately worked into the limestone. The pattern was a simple flower with 8 symmetrical petals, a circle at its center from which the petals radiated. It was an elegant detail, one that the local guide might dismiss as a common medieval decoration, a stylistic flourish from a time when artisans infused their work with natural motifs. To most, it was merely a rose, a symbol of beauty and purity, perhaps a subtle nod to the Virgin Mary, the mystical rose. But he saw, beyond the familiar symbolism, he saw a scar on the face of history, a coded message in plain sight. He knew that the rosette, in its simplest form, was far older than the cross. Its origins were lost in the mists of antiquity, a symbol of the sun, of celestial cycles, and of the sacred feminine. Before it adorned Christian baptistries, it was found on the temples of ancient Mesopotamia, a potent emblem for the goddess Ishtar. As a star goddess, Ishtar was the embodiment of both Venus and the morning star, a deity of love and war, of fertility and destruction, her symbol. The 8-pointed star or rosette represented her dominion over the heavens and the earthly realm. He could almost hear the echoes of ancient hymns and incantations dedicated to her power, a power that predated monotheism by millennia. This was not a decorative rose, it was a veiled star, a pagan ghost haunting the holy space. The question that consumed him was not how this symbol had found its way into a Christian church, but why. Was it a simple act of syncretism? Were early Christian missionaries seeking to convert pagan populations, intentionally absorbed and repurposed their symbols? This was the accepted historical explanation, the tidy narrative of assimilation. The rosette was sanitized, its pagan past forgotten, and reinterpreted as a symbol of Christ's light or the Virgin's purity. But he felt this explanation was too simplistic, too convenient. It ignored the deliberate and intelligent nature of the old world's spiritual systems. It presented a picture of a conquering faith simply absorbing its vanquished rivals, a process of brute force cultural assimilation. He believed the truth was far more complex, far more intentional. What if the inclusion of the rosette was not a surrender, but a strategic maneuver, a silent agreement between the new faith and the old forces it sought to suppress? Consider the psychological impact for a newly converted pagan. Seeing their familiar symbols embedded within the new sacred spaces would provide a sense of continuity, a bridge between the old beliefs and the new. But for the initiates, for those who possess the keys to the ancient mysteries, the rosette would be a wink, a whisper across time. It would tell them that the old truths were not destroyed, but merely hidden in plain sight. The goddess was not gone, she had simply changed her mask. He ran his fingers over the cold stone, feeling the carved lines of the petals. The 8 points of the rosette spoke of a deeper cosmology in numerology. The number 8 represents balance, infinity, and the octave, the completion of one cycle and the beginning of another. It was a number of resurrection and new beginnings, but also of cosmic law and destiny for the Gnostics, a heretical sect that challenged the orthodox view of Christianity. The number 8 held a special significance. It symbolized the Ogdoad, the 8 celestial spheres that separated the earthly realm from the divine pleroma, the ultimate source of spiritual light, the rosette, therefore, could be seen as a map of the soul's journey, a guide for the initiate to ascend through these spiritual layers. This was not just decoration, it was a cosmological diagram. The church itself, with its rosette, its arches, and its geometric proportions, was a model of the universe as understood by these hidden thinkers. It was a microcosm, a sacred space designed not just for worship, but for initiation. The baptismal font, he realized, was placed strategically below this symbol. The act of baptism, a cleansing and a rebirth, was not just a rite of passage into the Christian community. It was, for the initiated, an entrance into the Ogdoad, a first step on the path of spiritual ascent. The water was not just a symbol of purification, it was the cosmic sea from which all creation emerged, a concept deeply rooted in Babylonian and Egyptian mythology. He felt a chill, not from the cold air, but from the sudden, profound understanding. This rosette was a signpost, a secret handshake. It was a testament to a parallel spiritual tradition, a subterranean stream of belief that had flowed beneath the surface of official dogma for centuries. The early church, in its bid for universal dominion, had made a choice. It did not simply destroy the old gods, it buried them alive within its own temples. It absorbed their symbols, not to negate them, but to contain their power, to co-opt their energy. But in doing so, it created a paradox. It created a holy space that was simultaneously a place of orthodox worship and a repository of forgotten, forbidden knowledge. The rosette was a silent witness to this spiritual conflict, a permanent reminder that the old gods, though cloaked, had never truly left. They were right there, in the cold stone, waiting. The sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the nave. The rosette, now half shrouded in darkness, seemed to throb with a life of its own, its silent message growing louder in the twilight. He knew this was only the beginning. He had found the first word of a hidden alphabet, and now he had to learn the rest. The path he was on was not one of history, but of unveiling. He had to look for the next clue, the next symbol that whispered of the serpent and the staff. He walked deeper into the church, the scent of old stone and beeswax guiding him, his eyes, now trained to see beyond the obvious, scanned the nave for another clue. He found it in a stained glass window, a depiction of a saint he couldn't immediately identify. The saint, a stern-faced man with a flowing beard, held a staff in his hand, but it was not a simple shepherd's crook entwined around the length of the staff. From its base to its finial was a serpent. It was a detail so deliberate, so artistically precise, that it could not have been accidental. The serpent's coils were rendered in a deep, vibrant green, a stark contrast to the saint's somber robes. The saint held the staff like a scepter of authority, not a tool for herding sheep. The serpent was not being crushed underfoot. It was an integral part of the staff itself. The image resonated with a myth he knew well, that of the caduceus, the staff of Hermes, the Greek god of messengers, commerce, and thieves. The caduceus was a wand with 2 serpents entwined around it, often topped with wings. It was a symbol of negotiation, balance, and the dual forces of creation and destruction. The single serpent on the saint's staff was an echo of this, a simplified version perhaps, but the intent was unmistakable. The serpent, in ancient cultures, was a powerful and complex symbol. It represented both healing and poison, death and rebirth. It was a guardian of the underworld, but also a source of wisdom and immortality, shedding its skin to be reborn. The serpent was the Ouroboros, the self-devouring snake of eternity. It was the staff of Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. In the Gnostic traditions, the serpent was a teacher, a revealer of forbidden knowledge. It was the serpent in Eden, not a tempter, but a liberator, a figure who offered humanity the knowledge of good and evil, a necessary step toward spiritual self-awareness. The historical narrative, the one taught in catechism and accepted by most, was that the serpent was a symbol of evil, the embodiment of Satan. The saint's staff, therefore, could be interpreted as a symbol of his power over temptation, a sign that he had mastered the serpentine forces of sin. But this explanation, he felt, was a half-truth. It was a narrative that was convenient for a church seeking to consolidate its power by demonizing competing spiritual traditions. The serpent, the bringer of wisdom and gnosis, had to be redefined as a source of corruption and spiritual death, but the old symbol was too potent to be simply discarded. It had to be absorbed, its power contained and recontextualized. He saw this not as a victory, but as a silent compromise. The serpent was allowed to remain, but it was presented in a new context. The saint holding the staff was a synthesis, a bridge between two worlds. The Christian saint represented the new order, the divine authority of the church. But the serpent entwined staff was a silent acknowledgement of the old wisdom. The old knowledge was not destroyed. It was merely placed in the hands of a new guardian. The serpent's power was not eradicated, it was harnessed. The saint was not just a holy man, he was a magus, an esoteric master who had gained authority not by conquering the serpent, but by understanding and integrating its power. This blending of symbols spoke to a profound intellectual and spiritual tension. The early church fathers were well versed in the philosophical and religious traditions of their time. They read Plato. They studied Neoplatonism, and they were aware of the mystery cults and esoteric schools of thought. They knew the power of symbols. They understood that, to build a lasting faith, they couldn't simply demolish the old structures, they had to build upon them. The serpent on the staff was a testament to this strategy. It was a visual representation of the church's attempt to claim the mantle of divine wisdom, even if it had to borrow it from its predecessors. The serpent was a symbol of the immanent divine, this sacred energy that flows through the material world, the kundalini energy that rises through the spine in certain Eastern traditions. The staff, held by the saint, represented the transcendent divine, the God who exists outside of creation. The image was a silent lecture on the union of these two forces, the immanent and the transcendent, matter and spirit. The saint was not just a follower of Christ, he was a practitioner of spiritual science, a master of a hidden knowledge that allowed him to manipulate these forces. He was, in a sense, a Christian magus. The longer he stared at the image, the more layers he saw. The saint was not just holding a staff, he was holding a key. The key to understanding that the spiritual path was not just about blind faith and obedience, it was also about gnosis, about direct personal knowledge of the divine. The serpent's coils were a roadmap, a visual guide for the soul's ascent. The path of the initiate was not a straight line. It was a winding, coiling path of transformation and rebirth. The saint holding this staff was a guide on this journey, a figure who had walked the path of the serpent and emerged enlightened. He looked away from the window, his mind reeling. The rosette was a signpost. The serpent and staff were a key. He was beginning to see the church not as a building, but as a text, a sacred manuscript written in stone and glass. The symbols were the letters, and he was learning to read. The official history was a grand narrative, a sweeping epic of faith and salvation, but beneath the surface, there was a different story, a more ancient, more mysterious one, a story of a hidden wisdom that had never truly died, but had merely gone underground, waiting to be rediscovered by those with the courage to look for it. He felt the pull of the next clue, a sense of magnetic inevitability. The path was laid out for him, a winding and intricate journey, a journey that led to a labyrinth. He followed the path of the hidden knowledge, drawn inexorably toward the heart of the sacred space. On the stone floor of the nave, he found it, a massive circular labyrinth, its intricate pattern of concentric circles and pathways leading toward a central point to the casual observer. It was a work of art, a geometric puzzle for the eye. To the pilgrim, it was a symbolic journey to Jerusalem, a substitute for those who could not make the actual journey to the Holy Land. They would walk the path on their knees, a form of penitence, a physical manifestation of their spiritual quest. He had seen countless pilgrims perform this ritual, their faces etched with a mixture of reverence and physical strain, but he knew, from the rosette and the serpent, that this too was a half-truth, a surface narrative concealing a deeper, more ancient meaning. The labyrinth, in its pre-Christian form, was not a symbol of pilgrimage but of initiation. The most famous labyrinth, that of Crete, housed the Minotaur, a monstrous creature of half-man, half-bull. The hero, Theseus, had to navigate the twisting passages to confront and slay the beast. His guide was a thread given to him by Ariadne, a symbol of divine wisdom and guidance. The labyrinth was not a journey to a sacred city. It was a journey to the center of the self, a confrontation with one's own inner shadow, the monstrous, untamed part of the psyche. The path was not for penitence, but for revelation. The goal was not to reach a holy city, but to slay the inner beast and emerge reborn. With the thread of gnosis as one's guide, he stood at the entrance of the stone labyrinth, seeing it now not as a path of faith, but as a map of the psyche, the church, with its sacred geometry and its veiled symbols, was a tool for spiritual transformation. The labyrinth was the engine of this transformation. The act of walking it, he realized, was a form of meditative practice. The winding path, the constant turning, the seemingly random deviations, all served to quiet the rational mind and open the door to the unconscious. The pilgrim, in their single-minded focus on the path, was unknowingly entering a state of altered consciousness, a state where the veil between the material and the spiritual could be thinned. He saw the labyrinth as a map of the human journey from birth to death, a journey full of twists and turns, of moments where the destination seems impossibly close, only to be pulled away again. The central point, the heart of the labyrinth, was the moment of truth, the point of confrontation with the Minotaur. But the Minotaur, he now understood, was not an external demon. It was the ego, the self-centered part of the psyche that had to be overcome. The thread of Ariadne was the thread of divine connection, the quiet voice of intuition that guides the initiate through the darkness. The act of reaching the center was not a destination, it was a breakthrough, a moment of profound intellectual and spiritual realization. This understanding shattered the conventional view of the labyrinth as a simple tool for penance. It transformed it into a complex, multi-layered tool for self-discovery and spiritual alchemy. The church, he realized, had not simply absorbed the symbol of the labyrinth, it had co-opted its function. The labyrinth was still a place of initiation, but the true nature of that initiation had been veiled. The spiritual journey was still one of self-discovery, but the destination had been redefined. The Minotaur had been replaced with the promise of salvation through faith, and the thread of Ariadne had been replaced with the teachings of the church. The structure remained the same, but the inner meaning had been subtly, deliberately altered. He knelt down, tracing a path on the stone with his finger. The labyrinth was a mandala, a cosmic diagram designed to bring the human consciousness into alignment with a higher order. The concentric circles represented the various levels of existence, from the mundane to the divine. The winding path was the journey of the soul through these levels. The central point was the moment of apotheosis, the union with the divine. This was a concept found in Hinduism, Buddhism, and various esoteric schools of thought. The labyrinth, in its Christian context, was a silent testament to a universal truth, a truth that transcended the boundaries of a single faith. He felt the coldness of the stone seep into his bones, and with it, the cold clarity of a profound realization. The church was not a monolith, It was a palimpsest, a document with multiple layers of text written over one another. The official narrative was the top layer, the one visible to all, but beneath it lay the traces of older narratives, of forgotten truths, of a forbidden wisdom that had been carefully preserved. The rosette, the serpent, and the labyrinth were not just symbols, they were the letters of a hidden alphabet, a language of initiation and spiritual science. They were a testament to the fact that the spiritual battle was not always fought with swords and fire. Sometimes it was fought with symbols, with the silent, insidious power of a single image to contain, transform, and preserve a truth that could not be spoken aloud. His journey through this sacred space was not a tour, it was a deciphering. He felt the pull of the next clue, the next symbol that would reveal the alchemist's rose. He raised his gaze from the stone floor, the silent message of the labyrinth still resonating within him. The nave now felt less like a sanctuary and more like an open book. His eyes, following the axis of the church toward the apse, settled upon the great rose window. It was a breathtaking mosaic of coloured glass, a complex mandala of light and geometry that seemed to hold the sun itself in its embrace to the average worshipper. It was a magnificent artistic achievement, a hymn in glass and lead, telling a story of saints and salvation. The rose itself was a well-known symbol of the Virgin Mary, the mystical rose of heaven, and the unfolding of its petals a metaphor for the unfolding of divine love. But the rosette on the floor had already shown him that the rose was a symbol with a far older and darker history. He saw the rose window now not just as a religious icon but as a cosmic diagram. An alchemical mandala, the art of alchemy, was not merely the pursuit of turning lead into gold, it was a spiritual science, the pursuit of turning the base metal of the human soul into the gold of divine consciousness. The alchemist spoke of the Rosarium Philosophorum, the Rosary of the Philosophers, a text that described the stages of the alchemical process, the rose, with its many petals and its central point, was a symbol for this process of spiritual transformation. The rose, he realized, was a Gnostic and Hermetic symbol of the soul's journey toward the divine. The light streaming through the stained glass was not just ordinary sunlight, it was a representation of the divine light of Gnosis, a force that permeated and animated the entire structure. The colours of the rose window were not random. They were a deliberate palette of alchemical symbolism. The deep blues and purples represented the Negredo, the blackening or the initial stage of putrefaction and spiritual death, where the old self must be dissolved before the new can be born. The brilliant reds and golds represented the rubedo, the final stage of reddening, the moment of spiritual union and the creation of the philosopher's stone, the perfected self, the interplay of colours, the light dancing across the stone pillars and the worn pews, was not just a beautiful effect. It was an active process, a silent initiation. The church was not just a container for faith, it was a laboratory for the soul. The rose window was the most potent instrument in this laboratory. He imagined the effect of the light on the minds of the people gathered below. During Mass, as the sun moved across the sky, the colours would shift, transforming the space from a sombre, silent stone chamber into a vibrant, ethereal space. The light, entering through the eye of the rose window, would not just illuminate the church, it would act upon the minds of the congregation. It was a form of subliminal programming, a sensory experience designed to induce a state of receptivity, to open the mind to the subtle, hidden teachings of the space. The visual and emotional impact of the light was a form of ritual magic, a manipulation of consciousness for a specific spiritual purpose. This insight was a powerful climax to his journey through the church. The rosette was the signpost, the serpent, the key, the labyrinth, the path, and the rose window was the goal, the destination of the initiated. The rose was a secret symbol of a perfected state of being, a state achieved not through blind faith, but through the hard, deliberate work of self-transformation. The church, he now saw, had not just absorbed and repurposed pagan symbols, it had created a complex, multi-layered system of esoteric instruction. Hidden in plain sight, it was a secret society concealed within a public institution. The rose window was the greatest testament to this. It was a silent, beautiful sermon on the hidden power of light and colour, a guide to the alchemical process of spiritual rebirth. He felt a profound sense of awe, but also a growing unease. These symbols were not just historical relics. They were active. They were still working, still whispering their silent truths to those who had the eyes to see. The church, in its attempt to contain and control these forces, had become a vessel for them. It had become a paradox, a place of both exoteric worship and esoteric instruction. The knowledge, buried for centuries, was now uncovered. But a powerful symbol remained, a symbol so misunderstood and so deliberately reinterpreted that its original meaning was almost completely lost. A symbol that would turn the sacred on its head, the inverted cross. He felt a tremor run through the stone floor, a profound sense of foreboding as he moved toward a less travelled side chapel. There, etched into the base of a small, forgotten altar, he found it the inverted cross. To the modern mind, this symbol was an emblem of sacrilege, a blasphemous sign of anti-Christian sentiment and satanic worship. It was a symbol of defiance, of a complete rejection of the sacred. But he knew this interpretation was a recent and shallow one. He knew, with a certainty born of his journey through the hidden language of the church, that this too was a symbol of a deeper, more complex truth. The official Christian narrative was that the inverted cross was the crux patrina, the cross of St. Peter, according to tradition. When Peter was martyred in Rome, he requested to be crucified upside down, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. This act of humility transformed the inverted cross into a symbol of reverence, a testament to Peter's profound devotion. This was the story told to the faithful, a tale of piety and sacrifice. But he had learned to look beyond the stories. He had learned to see the symbols for what they were, containers of power, with multiple layers of meaning. The inverted cross was not just a symbol of humility, it was a symbol of descent, the upright cross, with its vertical axis pointing toward heaven, symbolized the ascent of the spirit to the divine, the union with the transcendent. The inverted cross, by its very nature, reversed this journey. It symbolized the descent of the spirit into the material world, a journey from the divine to the earthly. This concept was deeply rooted in Hermeticism and Kabbalah, ancient esoteric traditions that saw creation not as a singular act, but as an ongoing process of emanation, a descent of the divine light into the darkness of matter. The inverted cross was a visual representation of this process, the spirit willingly entering the material realm to animate and sanctify it. He saw the altar and the inverted cross beneath it as a focal point for this understanding. The altar was the place where the divine, in the form of the Eucharist, was brought into the material world. It was a point of intersection between heaven and earth. The inverted cross, he realized, was not a rejection of this process. It was a profound affirmation of it. It was a sign to the initiated that the true sacred journey was not just an ascent to the heavens, but a conscious descent into the world of form, to find the divine spark hidden within the darkness of matter. It was the ultimate act of spiritual alchemy to find God not just in the stars, but in the soul. This was a radical and heretical interpretation. It suggested that the purpose of spirituality was not to escape the world, but to transform it from within. It turned the orthodox view of the cross on its head, quite literally. The cross was no longer just a symbol of salvation from the world, but a symbol of salvation through the world. It was a call to embrace the material, to see the divine in the mundane, and to understand that the spiritual journey was a continuous cycle of ascent and descent. The inverted cross was a testament to the belief that the divine was not just in the heavens, but was also hidden waiting to be rediscovered, in the very earth beneath their feet. He touched the cold stone of the altar, feeling the rough edges of the carved cross. The symbol, so often used to shock and offend, was in its original context a symbol of profound spiritual truth. It was a challenge to the established order, a silent proclamation that the greatest act of faith was not to flee the world, but to embrace it. It was a sign of a secret, hidden tradition that had found a way to survive, even thrive, within the very walls of the institution that sought to contain it. He had followed the path from the rosette to the serpent, from the labyrinth to the rose, and now to the inverted cross. Each symbol had revealed a deeper layer, a more profound truth. But there was one more symbol, a final piece of the puzzle, a symbol so powerful and so misunderstood that it would reveal the true nature of the spiritual warfare being fought within these hallowed halls, a symbol of the all-seeing eye. He left the small chapel, the weight of the inverted cross's meaning pressing upon his mind. The final chapter of this silent book, he knew, was not etched in a forgotten corner but prominently displayed, hiding in plain sight in the most sacred space of the church. He moved toward the high altar, his gaze drawn upward to the apex of the vaulted ceiling. There, in a place of honor, surrounded by frescoes of saints and angels, was a triangle with an eye at its center, the Eye of Providence, a symbol so universally recognized yet so thoroughly misunderstood. To the Orthodox Christian, this was the all-seeing eye of God, a representation of the Holy Trinity and God's benevolent watchfulness over creation. It was a comforting symbol of divine omniscience, a reminder that they were never truly alone. This was the exoteric meaning, the public face of the symbol, but he had seen too many layers of deception, too many veiled truths, to accept this at face value. The eye, like the rosette and the serpent, was a symbol with a far older and far more complex lineage. He knew that the eye was a powerful symbol in ancient Egyptian mythology. It was the eye of Horus, a symbol of protection, royal power, and good health. It represented the divine, seeing principle, the faculty of consciousness itself. It was also a key symbol in Gnosticism, representing the divine spark, the single point of spiritual light trapped within the darkness of the material world. For the Gnostics, the eye was not a symbol of an external, watching God, but of the internal, immanent divinity, the divine consciousness that resided within the initiate. It was a symbol of gnosis, of direct personal knowledge of the divine, a knowledge that transcended the need for a church or a priest. The Eye of Providence in the church's ceiling was not a symbol of the Holy Trinity. It was, in its deepest and most original meaning, a symbol of a transcendent, impersonal, and all-powerful force, a force that existed outside the constraints of anthropomorphic religion. It was a symbol of divine surveillance, a reminder that the spiritual forces at play were not just the benevolent God of Christian theology, but a more ancient, more powerful, and perhaps more terrifying force of cosmic law and destiny. It was a symbol of the divine's relentless search for the awakened soul, a spiritual searchlight piercing the darkness of material existence. The placement of the eye was no accident. It was at the highest point of the church, the point of convergence, the place where the earthly realm met the heavenly. It was a silent proclamation that the ultimate authority was not the Pope or the King, but the all-seeing, all-knowing cosmic consciousness. This was the ultimate realization, the climax of his journey. The church was not just a container for faith. It was a grand conspiracy of symbols, a deliberate and meticulous attempt to merge two spiritual traditions. The Eye of Providence was the final proof of this, a symbol of hidden power that transcended the very religion it was meant to represent. It was a symbol of a Gnostic God, an impersonal force of cosmic law, masquerading as the benevolent father of Christian theology. He stood in the center of the nave, the light from the rose window illuminating the floor labyrinth, the serpent staff saint peering from the stained glass, the rosette near the font, the inverted cross in the hidden chapel, and now, the eye watching over it all. He saw it all as a single, coherent whole. The church was a monument to a spiritual battle, a silent war of symbols being fought in stone and glass. The old gods, the old wisdom, the old gnosis had not been vanquished. They had been absorbed, their symbols co-opted, their power contained, and their meanings inverted. The church was not a monolith of a single faith, but a battlefield of competing spiritualities, a place where a hidden, esoteric tradition of gnosis and spiritual alchemy was being practiced right under the nose of the Orthodox faithful. The silence of the church now felt different. It was no longer the silence of peace, but the silence of profound and ongoing struggle. The symbols were not just historical relics, they were active, still whispering their silent truths to those who had the eyes to see. He knew there was more. A final synthesis to be made, a final question to be answered. What did it all mean? What was the purpose of this silent war of symbols? The answer, he knew, lay in the unspoken word. He stood at the centre of the nave, a silent witness to a spiritual landscape that was far more complex than he had ever imagined. He had followed the breadcrumbs of the occult, the rosette, the serpent, the labyrinth, the rose, the inverted cross, and the eye, each one a piece of a hidden language. Now, it was time to synthesize this knowledge, to bring the disparate pieces into a single, coherent whole. The question was no longer what these symbols were, but what their collective presence meant. What was the purpose of this hidden language, this subterranean stream of Gnostic and Hermetic thought flowing beneath the surface of Orthodox Christianity? The answer, he realized, was in the unspoken word. The church was not just a building, it was a testament to a deliberate act of preservation, a grand, strategic maneuver in a silent spiritual war. The early Christian builders, the architects, the artists, were not just craftsmen, they were initiates, masters of a hidden wisdom. They understood that the old gods and the old truths were too potent to be destroyed. So, they did the next best thing. They buried them alive within the very walls of the new faith. They created a palimpsest, a document with multiple layers of meaning. The top layer was for the masses, a simple, exoteric faith of faith and salvation. But the bottom layer, the hidden layer, was for the few, the initiated. The rosette was the first word, a silent acknowledgement of the old cosmic order, the primacy of the sun and the sacred feminine. The serpent and the staff were the second word, a testament to the power of immanent wisdom, of gnosis, a direct personal knowledge of the divine. The labyrinth was the third word, a map of the soul's journey, a guide for the initiatic confrontation with the inner shadow. The rose window was the fourth word, a cosmic mandala of light and colour, a tool for spiritual alchemy and the transformation of the self. The inverted cross was the fifth word, a profound statement on the descent of the divine into matter, a call to find God not in heaven, but in the earth. The eye of providence was the sixth word, a symbol of a transcendent, impersonal cosmic consciousness, a Gnostic God that transcended the confines of any single religion. All of these symbols, he now understood, were part of a single, coherent narrative. They were a subterranean stream of forbidden history, a silent dialogue between competing spiritualities. The Church, in its attempt to consolidate power and create a single, unified faith, had inadvertently become a repository for the very truths it sought to suppress. The symbols were not just decorations, they were anchors, a silent resistance, a quiet refusal to let the old wisdom die. They were a testament to the belief that the divine was not a singular, monolithic entity, but a vast, multifaceted force that could not be contained within the confines of a single dogma. He felt a profound sense of awe, but also a growing unease. This was not just a historical curiosity, it was a spiritual reality. The symbols were not dead relics, they were active, alive, and still whispering their silent truths. The church was not a place of quiet reverence, but a spiritual battlefield, a place where the forces of exoteric faith and esoteric gnosis were locked in a silent, eternal struggle. The unspoken word, he realized, was the final truth that the spiritual journey was not a destination, but an endless path of discovery, a constant peeling away of layers, a relentless search for the divine in the most unexpected of places. The journey was not over. It had only just begun, for those drawn to secrets. Perhaps subscribing is not a click, it's a vow, knowledge buried for centuries, now uncovered, and still, there's more